My partner and I bought this house back in 2010. We'd rented a house, but this was the first house that we'd owned together, and we'd been looking and looking, and everything in the sort of area where we were living before was too expensive, and we came across this, which was a little bit out of our area, and it was a complete wreck. It had been half done up into flats, and then they'd just given up on it. We embarked on the most enormous renovation, top to bottom, knew everything. It was damp, it was everything. But from the very start, we could see it was going to be the first place that we were going to own together, hopefully where we were going to live, where we were going to have our kids. So we kind of embraced it, and although we weren't living in it through the renovation, it felt really like home. It was over Easter weekend, so the builders weren't due to be in for the weekend, and we came in on Good Friday morning, and there was... The window was broken, there was tape all over the window, there was tape on the door, and there was something pushed through the door saying that the police had been in the house and could we call them. So we were like, this is a bit weird, but when we went through to the back of the house, practically the only window that wasn't boarded up had been kicked in, and we'd just begun to put down floors and put in the boiler, and everything was ripped up. And so we were like, so we called the police, and they came down and said that the two kids really, had been in the house in the night and had been caught burgling it by some miracle. They tried to climb out of the front window because the front door was padlocked shut, and a camera had swung round at the top of the street and caught them, and someone actually happened to be looking in it. We made statements, the builders made statements, they identified their tools, everything that had been stolen, and we were like, that's very unpleasant, but no real harm done. Not at that point realising how expensive a new boiler was going to be, because they'd ripped all the pipes off and broken the old one. The two boys were charged with breaking and entering. It's effectively a relatively minor crime, and they were minors, so there was no reason for them to be remanded to jail. That would have been a massive overreaction to really quite a small offence. So they were released back to their homes, back to their families, with contact from the youth offending team. We came back in on, I think it was the Sunday, to do either some measuring or probably some endless testing with paint pots, which is what we spent months, it felt like, doing. And the house had been broken into again. They'd kicked in the boarded bit of the window where they'd come in before, and there was graffiti sprayed all over upstairs. So we called the police back out. They looked and said, oh dear, well, we'll ask them, but there's really not much we can do. And we got people back out to board it back up, and sort of we're thinking we just need to sort of start it again. But at that point I was just weeping and saying, I just don't know if I want to live here, and it feels like it's not our home anymore, and how will we ever feel safe here? Maybe this happens all the time if you live around here. They were never charged with coming back into the house the second time, because there was no proof that they'd done it, but they were charged and convicted with the coming in and breaking in the first time. I was contacted by the local youth offending team here, who said, would I be interested in doing a restorative justice meeting with one of the boys, who had said that he would be prepared to do it. At that point, it very much felt like I was doing it as something which might have a positive outcome for them, something which is a good thing to do. Evidence shows it helps reduce reoffending. That was kind of the mindset that I went into doing it with. I said I was happy to do it, but it was kind of quite a sort of almost like an academic exercise. I will go and do this meeting. Hopefully it will have a positive impact, but it didn't feel like it was going to be very personal for me at the time of arranging the meeting. When it actually came to sort of the day of the meeting and getting there and getting to the building, suddenly, and being shown the meeting room, which we were shown first, and we were told who was going to be there. At that point I started to feel really quite nervous about it. But actually on the day everyone was very supportive and very helpful, and they were completely clear that if at any point I didn't want to do it anymore, I just had to say and we could leave. By the time we actually met him and he came into the room, he turned out to be a tiny little teenager and not frightening at all. He hadn't had his growth spurt, and he looked unbelievably nervous and a bit horrified by the whole situation. And I only made that worse by suddenly feeling very emotional about it and weeping and saying, you know, did you not think about how we would feel? It was our house, it was our home, we were trying to create something, and you just destroyed it. How did you think that would make us feel? And he just looked mortified and sort of stared at the table, and I think was suddenly really like, oh God, you know, this is really awful. But I think that we felt better for looking him in the eye and going, actually, this is how we felt. And it was amazing how emotional I did still feel about it. So you kind of think it probably was still bubbling away there, and it would only have taken one thing to happen, even kind of 5 years later, for all that to have sort of resurfaced. But actually, you know, getting it out there, and also, you know, like most crime, it's not, you know, it's not some giant gang living on your doorstep doing terrible things. It's actually one small, sad, mixed up teenager who's bored and frustrated and angry with his life, taking it out on something which to him didn't feel like it would matter to anyone. But I think through the weeping and the general hideousness that he found through that, I think it did really strike him that it wasn't okay and why it mattered, and the impact that even that kind of crime, which feels quite victimless, has on the people who are the victims. Even if you don't see them, it doesn't mean that they don't, you know, that it doesn't have an impact on him. And we talked about it on the way home and both felt really pleased that we'd done it. We felt that we had actually, although we hadn't thought we would, had really got something positive out of it. And watching his reaction and listening to what he had to say, we felt that he'd got something out of it too. He'd really had a chance to sort of reflect a bit more on what had happened and why, and the impact that had had and why. And I think that can only be a good thing. Talking about it and talking to the person who did it gives you a chance to really process it and put it behind you and make a difference to them, a difference to you, and hopefully a difference to your community. Because I do really feel we all need to live in the communities that we live in, and that involves, you know, the rough and the smooth. And if you can make things better for you, for your community, for the people within it, then you need to do it. But yeah, I would definitely recommend it, and it's not as frightening as it sounds.